Hello students, welcome back. Myself Pushpendra Singh and we are going to start with the NCRT classes. So this would be our fourth class and we are at the sixth standard history book. Okay, that is called the the history our past part one. Okay, and myself Pushpendra Singh and we are going to start with the history book. All right. So we were at the Sangha. So continuing to our last class, we were studying the Sangha. Okay, so both Mahavira and Gautam Buddha, right? So those both of them were basically contemporary in the time period. So both were thought that the people who left their home in the search of the true knowledge, they need some association, they need some place to stay together, right? So in order to make the life more easier, right, for them, the people who are basically searching the true knowledge, a sanghas were basically set up. A sanghas were basically set up so that these people can stay together. These people can stay basically together. So the rules which were made, right, for the Buddhist sanghas, were written down in a book that is called Vinaya Pitaka. Vinaya Pitaka. So this Vinaya Pitaka is basically a book. Is basically a book which has the basically rules where the people who lives in the sangha should ideally should observe those rules. All right. Now from this the Vinaya Pitaka or the rule book, we came to know that there were separate branches for the man and the woman. There were separate branches. Now all the men could join the sangha, all men, right? So you must understand, but there are certain limitations on the children's, the women, right, on those debtors, slaves, and etc. For example, if the children want to join the sangha, the children has to take the permission from their parents. If the slave want to join, the slave has to take the permission from the masters, right? If you must understand, if the woman want to join the sangha, the woman has to take the permission from the husband. In the similar way, those who work for the king, they have to take the permission from the king. Those who have debtors, those have to take the permission from the creditor. So these were something conditioned. Otherwise, all men were allowed and they could join the basically sangha. Now, the men and women who joined the sangha, they led a very simple life. Now they mediated for most of the time, right? And they went for the cities, the towns and villages and so on and so forth for a food, right? They were basically called bhikkhus and the bhikkhuni. The bhikkhus and the bhikkhuni. Now you must understand, the bhikkhu is a Prakrit word, which is also called a beggar, Bhikkhuni is basically the term which is given to the female, right? So the person who basically beg, right, for the sustenance. So they are also called bhikkhus and the bhikkhuni in the Prakrit language. Now they have strict rules to be observed while during in the Sangha, which is written in the Vinaya Pitaka, which was a book, right? Which basically compiled all such rules. Now these bhikkhus and bhikkhunis used to observe such rules, right, during that period. Now they taught others and helped others. Now the point is that while living in an association called the sanghas, they were taught basically so that they can help others. They teach to the others, right? And they regular held the meetings, right, for settling down any sort of a quarrels if any quarrel have been taken place within the sangha. Now those people who join basically sanghas are those people which are also the Brahmins, Kshatriya, merchants, laborers, barbers, courtesans, and the slaves, right? So these were people who basically joined. So you see here the ranks or their status. The Brahmins were there, the merchants were there, the barbers were there, and the slaves were there, right? Now many of them wrote down the teachings of the Buddha, right? Some of them also composed a beautiful poems also, describing the life of the sangha. From that poems also we came to know about the life of sanghas also. Now let's discuss the monastery. Now you must understand, these people who were belongs to the Buddhism or the Jainism, right? The Buddhist or the Jainas, they people went from the place to place throughout the year. all right, in search of the knowledge, right, and to propagate the teachings that they learn from their gurus. Now for them, they used to travel on the foot for the longer distance. Now they need some place to settle down. They need some place to settle down. They are also called biharas. They are also called biharas, or for permanent shelter they are called monasteries were built, right? So they are also called biharas. Now the earliest biharas used to built out of the wood, out of wood. Then they used to take the bricks. Now you must understand, the some of the people or some of the bhikkhus and the bhikkhunis or the Buddhists or the Jainas, they even stays in the caves. Apart from the biharas, these caves were dug into the hills, right? Just like you might have seen the caves. Now these caves were very often, especially in the Western India. All right. Now these biharas were basically donated by the rich merchants or the landowners or the kings, right? Because they supported uh, uh, they applied to search the knowledge. So they were donated by the rich merchants as well as, the kings. Now the local people came with a gift of food, clothing and the medicines for the monks and the nuns. Now you must understand, what I said is that the local people who used to stay nearby, right, they came with a gift of food, clothes and medicines for the monks, right? And in return, the monks, used to taught the people regarding the life enlightenment. Now through this way, through the people's contact, the Buddhism basically spread to different parts of the continents and beyond also. You know that the Buddhism spread to almost all countries of the southern India, sorry, the South Asia, right, Southeast Asia, right, which has spread to say Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, Japan, China, right, even beyond also, right, apart from India. Now let's understand the ashramas. What is this ashramas, right? So you must understand, these were basically the stages of the life, right? So everyone knows about the ashramas. These are basically stages of the life. These ashramas are recognized, or they were basically divided, or these stages of the life is basically divided into four parts, one is called brahmacharya, second is called grahistha, third is called banaprastha, and fourth is called basically samyasa, right? So these were brahmacharya, grahistha, vanprastha and sannyasa that you saw. So these are basically four stages of the life. So let's understand them one by one, right? So brahmacharya, right? So you must understand, during early years of the life, right, the students, right, are expected to lead a very very simple life, very simple life. And they used to study the Vedas. During early years of their life, now when I say that early years of the life means before the age of, basically before the age of grahistha means they used to marry and they will have the childrens, and they will stay just like a householders, the normal couple, the normal married couple. So they will have the children, wife and all of the married life, right? But before grahistha, they used to stay a very very simple life, right? And only study the Vedas, and the Brahmin, Kshatriya and Vaishyas are expected to lead, right? Not the Shudras. So during the ancient time, the Shudras were generally not allowed, right, to observe such simple life and study the Vedas. They were not allowed basically, right? The second stage is called grahistha. The grahistha means very simple, ghar. Grahistha means grahastha ashram. So where the people are expected to get married, settle down, have the wife and the children, enjoy the life. So this is what is all about grahistha life. Then banprastha. That means you must understand, after covering your grahastha life, you have to spend some of your life in the forest. Like in the forest, what the person will do? Obviously, the person would meditate, right? Control his mind, control his senses. So that is basically the vanprastha. The vanprastha is the third stage where the people retire from the grahistha life, retired from the grahastha life, and move to basically your the village life, sorry, the forest life, where the people used to meditate. And the last one is sannyasis. Sannyasi means they used to give up everything. Okay, that they used to give up everything and become total sannyasi, just a wanderer, move from one place to another place, right? And beg, right, or become bhikkhu, and ask the people to give or to donate something to have, right? Now these systems of the asana allows men to spend some part of their life in the meditation, right? This is what the banprastha ashram stage is, that so which allow the people to meditate for the quite a period of the time, right? Now you must understand, like shudras, the women are also not allowed, right, generally to study the Vedas. So women are not allowed, the Shudras were not allowed, and they had to follow the ashramas chosen by the husband. For example, if a man married with a woman, right? So the woman is expected to follow the ashramas which are chosen by the husband. That means the woman has to lead the life which is chosen by the husband. So there is no other choice, because women were not allowed to study the Vedas during the ancient period of the time. All right, so these are all, right, ashramas. Let's discuss about the Ashoka the Great, right? So you might have heard about the Ashoka. So you must understand, let's briefly discuss about the Ashoka first of all. So Ashoka was one of the greatest ruler in the times, greatest ruler, right? Even to the history also. Now, as we know about, inscriptions are those, the imprints which were made on the hard surfaces, for example, on the solid surfaces, on the metal surfaces. So these were some of the, the messages, some of the orders which were given by the Ashoka to the people, right, regarding how to observe certain things. So these were basically inscriptions which were written down on the say, solid surface, on the stones, or on the metal surfaces. Now these were carved on the pillars. You might have seen that pillar edicts, rock surfaces, right? You might have seen the Ashoka's inscriptions, which were basically lying throughout the Indian subcontinent. Now, the empire that Ashoka ruled was founded by his grandfather, okay, Chandragupta Maurya, right? You must understand this Chandragupta Maurya, who basically, ruled the empire around 2,300 years ago. So Chandragupta Maurya is a grandfather of your Ashoka, and who ruled this Indian subcontinent. Now, the Chandragupta Maurya was supported by a wise man. So you must understand, there was a wise man which is very, very famous, and which is also called Chanakya. Chanakya or the Kautilya. Okay, so you must understand the Chandragupta, which was supported by the wise man who, which was also called Chanakya or the Kautilya. Now, many of the Chanakya's ideas, right, for example, are written in a book that is called Arthashastra. So you might have heard about this book. So that Arthashastra book basically gives you some of the, the things which are generally to be observed by the king regarding the administration of the state, regarding the politics, regarding the social affairs, regarding the economic affairs, right? So these were some of the ideas are written down in the book, which is called Arthashastra. All right. Now, in the empire of the Chandragupta Maurya, there were several cities. And the capital was Patliputra, Takshila, and the Ujjain. Right. So you must understand about many cities which were known for for various things. Now, for example, the Takshila was known as a gateway to the northwest, right? Because the Takshila is, because of its location, it is it is basically connecting the Central Asia. So that is why it is also called the gateway to the northwest, because it connects the Central Asian countries. That the Ujjain is on the route from north to south India, right? So it is basically various officials used to move down. For example, merchants, officials, the craft persons probably lived in these cities, and they used to move from north India to the southern India. So these were some of the famous cities. And like that Patliputra, which is in the present term, which in present name is called Patna, right, which is located in the banks of Ganga, right? You must understand, it is one of the greatest cities. It was one of the greatest cities, and which was also capital of the Gupta Empire, right, in the ancient period. Now, let's understand about the Ashoka's empire. Okay, Ashoka's empire. So let's understand. Uh, in his empire means the Gupta's empire. There were officials. They were officials just like a normal empire. The officials were devoted, right, for collecting of the tax. Right. So you must understand there were different tax were collected from the different professionals. For example, the taxes were collected from the farmers, the taxes were collected from the herders, the taxes were collected from the craft persons, the taxes were collected from the traders. So to collect the taxes, a separate tax officials were appointed by the Ashoka. And you must understand, right, these those people who basically does something, the professional work, they used to put some taxes, right? Now there were officials also uh, punished who disobeyed the ruler orders, right? Many of these officials are given salaries. So you must understand, the ruler, whatever the king gives the order, the official has to compulsorily execute that order. If the official do not obey the order, he will be executed, or he would be punished for that. And these officers are generally paid a salary. Now there were messengers also. These messengers used to send, right, from one place to the another place, right? And there were spies also. These spies was kept watch on the officials, right, whether the officials are working, right, as per the orders or not, whether is there any sort of a corruption in the state or not, right? These emperors supervised all the work by himself, right? Now you must understand, the emperor supervised the work by himself itself, with the help of the members of the royal family and the senior ministers. So it has a very, a small group of the loyal people. With the help of them, the emperor itself supervise the work. Okay. Now there were other areas or the provinces also. Now these were basically ruled from the provincial capitals. Now you must understand, for example, if I say that there are areas which are lying nearby Takshila or the Ujjain, they were ruled from a capital such as Takshila or the Ujjain, right? Now there was some amount of control from the main capital, which is called Patliputra. All right. Otherwise, these provincial capitals are basically ruled those areas which were lying in the provinces. Okay. Now there were royal princes also, right? These royal princes, which were sent as a governors, right? And generally the rules were probably followed, right? Generally the central administration rule generally were followed, but these royal princes are sent as a governor to the provinces. Okay. Now there were vast areas also between these centers, like apart from these main centers, these were here the Mauryas, right? Maurya, right? Try to control the roads, rivers, which were important for the transport, right? Every kingdom or every king would try to control the road, rivers, and whatever the means of the transportation, right? To basically control that area. And also moreover, there is another angle like to collection of the tax and the tribute also, right? Now there were also forested regions also. The people used to live in those areas, and they are more or less independent, because the forested people dependent on the forest itself, so they are less dependent on the outsiders. Now these people would be expected to provide certain type of, say, the honey, timber, wax, right, as well as the elephants to the Mauryan officers, so that it can be used, right, in the day-to-day administration. Then let's understand Ashoka. Okay. So who was Ashoka, right? So he was a very famous Mauryan ruler. So you must understand, Ashoka was a grandchildren of the Chandragupta Maurya. Okay, all right. So Chandragupta Maurya was grandfather of Ashoka. So he was very famous Mauryan ruler. Okay, he was the first ruler. He was the first ruler or first Mauryan ruler who tried to take his message to the people through the inscriptions. So inscriptions, he used the root called inscriptions. Through the inscriptions, he propagated his ideas to the distinct land. So you must understand, right? On the inscription on the hard surfaces, he basically sent his messages to the people. Right now, most of these Ashoka's inscriptions were written in the Prakrit language. The Prakrit language is the land of the is a language of ordinary people. Now this is a language which is written in the Brahmi script, right? So script was Brahmi, but the language was a Prakrit, which is also called the language of the ordinary people. Now you must understand, there was a separate name which is called Kalinga. Kalinga, you might have heard about the Kalinga Express. Okay, in your history books also you would be coming across this name, right? So Kalinga was the ancient name of coastal Orissa, or you can say that the coastal area of the Orissa is called as Kalinga. So this Ashoka, who was the greatest emperor among all Mauryan emperors, right, and he propagated his ideas through the inscriptions. This Ashoka basically fought a war. This war, he conquered the Kalinga. He conquered the Kalinga, and after cutting down so many people, after slaughtering so many people, he was so horrified. So horrified means his conscience was totally broken down. His conscience was totally broken down. He saw such vast amount of bloodshed, violence, and his total conscience was upturned down. He decided that he will never fight a war, because of his ambition to overtake the Kalinga, he basically fought a war. Now he decided that he will never fought a war, and he will live a very simple life with harmonious relationship with all religions, with all native states. So he decided that he will never fight any war. So right, you must understand. So that is why he is the only king in the history of the world who gave up. He is the only king in the history of the world who gave up the conquest after winning a war. So you can understand that how big he was, and he was probably the only king who gave up such conquest. All right. Next, let's understand Ashoka Dhamma. Okay, now Dhamma is not something that Ashoka want his subjects to follow compulsory. You must understand. But Dhamma does not involve any sort of a compulsory worship or a compulsory performance of a sacrifice. No, no, nothing like that. It was very, very secular. So the Ashoka Dhamma did not have any element of sacrifice or any element of worshipping of the god. No such things were there, right? So you must understand. He felt that just as a father to teach his children, he had a duty to instruct his subjects. So he thought that just like a normal father who basically teaches children, like you should do this, you should not do this. So he felt himself as a guardian of the subjects, that he should instruct the subjects through the dhamma, right? So but you must understand, though his dhamma was very secular, but he was inspired by the teachings of Buddha. He was inspired by the teachings of Buddha, and for propagation of his, the Dhamma, he appointed a separate set of officials. Right? These officials are called Dhamma Mahamata. Dhamma Mahamata. So this is UPSC has asked this question. So you must understand, these were officials who were appointed to propagate the Ashoka's Dhamma to the subjects. They are called Dhamma Mahamata. Right? These Dhamma Mahamatas used to went from place to place, from one place to the another place, uh, teaching people about the Dhamma, right? And now the people in the empire followed the different religions, right? You must understand, right? And this sometimes led to the conflict, because these dhammacharis, which are called dhamma mahamattas, used to propagate the Ashoka's dhamma. Now people used to feel that these dhamma mahamattas used to interfere into the religious belief. So this has led to the conflicts. Okay, but you must understand, even that period of the time, they used to speak to the people why the animals are sacrificed, the slaves and servants are ill treated, right? And there were quarrels in the families, neighborhood, etc., and so forth. So Ashoka got his message, right, which is inscribed on the rocks and the pillars, instructing the officials to read this message to those who could not read by themselves. All right. So these were inscriptions which were basically there, right? which were basically there to the people who could not read those inscriptions. So there were people who were there as officials to read for them who could not read these inscriptions. Now Ashoka also sent a messengers, right, to spread ideas about the Dhamma to other lands such as Syria, Egypt, Greece, and Sri Lanka. All right. So you must understand there were different messengers also. These messengers used for propagation of this Dhamma, the so-called Dhamma, to different lands, even beyond the country's boundary. For example, in the Syria, Egypt, Greece, Sri Lanka, these Dhammacharis used to went there and propagate the Ashoka's Dhamma, right? The Shogas also built the roads, he dug the wells, built rest houses, right? And he arranged for the medical treatment for the both the human and the animals, because he consists he considered that the animals also having the same feeling just like a man. Okay, now let's understand this vital villages and the thriving towns. Okay, all right. So what is this vital villages and the thriving towns all about? So you must understand the vital villages and the thriving towns, which is your next chapter. Now you have seen that the things which we used, the things which we used are made up of iron, all right. Now which we use basically in our daily life, all right. Now these iron which the use of iron in our subcontinent was basically begun around 3000 years ago. So you must understand the use of iron is not very new, but it is around 3000 years ago we started using this iron as our day-to-day life, as our day-to-day daily routine life. Now these old tools, equipments of the iron have been found at various places. Okay, from there only we come to know about the use of irons, the use of iron equipments, right, from the different places. Now you can say that around 2500 years ago, right, there was evidence, the archaeologists have found an evidence of the growing use of iron tools, right. You might have heard about the three different the stages that we call Paleolithic, Mesolithic, and Neolithic. So during that period of the time, around 2500 years ago, that was a Neolithic time, the people started using or people started growing use of the iron tools, right, which include the axis kulhadi for clearing the forest, and the iron which were used as a plowshare, right. So right, in the fields, in the agricultural fields. So from there we came to know about the thriving towns and the vital villages, which are very important, right, with respect to the development of any village, right. So let's understand the village life. So you must understand, I have divided this village life into different say in the different compartments. So you read basically southern India, northern India, and the cities. So you first read the southern India. How was the village life in the southern India? Okay, so you must understand, in the southern India there were at least three different kind of people, three different type of people which used to live in the most of the villages. Okay, so these people in the southern and northern part of subcontinent, right. Now when you say in the Tamil region, there were large landowners, okay, which was known as Velalar. Okay, so you have seen the Gotras or the surnames of the Tamil people. There were some people who use this Gotra as a Velalar. So they were basically the large landowners or landlords. Okay, the ordinary plowman, which is also called Uzawar, Uzhavar, Uzawar. They were ordinary plowmen, right? And the landless laborers, right, including the slaves, were also known as Khudai Siar and Adimai. Khudai Siar and Adimai. All right. So you must understand these were at least three different kind of people which used to stay or which used to live in most of the villages of the southern India. If you take the Tamil region, the large landowners are called Belalar, the ordinary plowmen are called Uzawar, okay, and the landless laborers and the slaves which are also called as Kadhaisiar and Adimai. Kadhaisiar and Adimai, right? These people have lived in the villages. Okay, let's understand the village life in the northern India, in the northern India. So how about the village life in the northern India? Let's understand this way. So the village headman, the village headman in the northern India, which is called Grama Bhojaka. Grama is the name of the village, right? Which is also called village. So Grama Bhojaka. So Grama Bhojaka is also called as village headman in the northern India, in the northern India. And men from the same family, right, held these positions for generations together. You must understand. So this position was a hereditary. This position was hereditary because men from the same family held this position for the generations together, right? So this was hereditary position. Now this village headman, which is also called Gram Bhojaka, was often the largest landowner of northern Indian villages. You are getting my point. So he was often the largest landowner of the northern Indian villages. And now, generally, this largest landowner, which is also called Bhojaka, he had lot of slaves, lot of hired workers. These workers and the slaves used to cultivate on the land which is owned by this the Gram Bhojaka, who is the largest owner of the land in the village. So he had lot of slaves and the hired workers who used to work upon the field which is owned by this Gram Bhojaka. And the next point is he was very powerful, right? He was very powerful, and the king also used him, right, to collect the taxes from the villages. So he was just, you can say that he was basically a key person to collecting the tax also, right, on behalf of the king, right? And he also functioned as a judge, and sometime he will also act as a policeman. So you can think of the Gram Bhojaka in the northern India. He was so powerful that he functioned as a judge, he functioned as a policeman, he functioned as a largest landowner. He hired the slaves and hired different workers who used to cultivate on the land. So you can think of, right, you can think of the power which he used to influence, and the king used to use this service to collect basically the taxes from the villages. So he was so powerful, he was so powerful. And you must understand, there were other independent farmers also. These independent farmers are called grahi grihapatis. These grihapatis are smaller landlords or smaller landowners. So the biggest one is called Gram Bhojaka, the smaller one is called grihapatis. These grihapatis are also called small landowners. Small landowners. Now, they were men, women, such as Dasa Karmakara. This Dasa and Dasyu, I have given you in the last class. They were basically, the people, or the people who did not own the land, right? But they used to earn their living, right, on the field which is owned by the others. So you can say that they are basically some sort of a bonded laborers which used to work on the field, which may be owned by these grihapatis, or which may be owned by Gram Bhojaka. So they were basically the cultivators, or you can say the landless cultivators, right? In most of the villages, they were also some craft persons like blacksmith, potter, carpenter, weaver. These were blacksmiths also used to work in the northern India also. All right, now let's understand the cities also. Cities, so you must understand, many of the cities, right, developed from 2500 years ago were the capitals of Mahajanpada. We have understood that concept called Mahajanpada in our last class, right? The Janapada where the people put his first foot first time. The Mahajanpada is also a Janpada, which is most prominent, and which has generally a fortified fort and a capital also, and which is most prominent among the Janapadas, right? So the capitals of the Mahajanpada are basically considered as a cities. Now, in those cities, right? That the many archaeologists also found it, right? Because archaeologists' work is to excavate, to dig and to unearth different type of the remains of remnants of the previous life or the past life. So these archaeologists went down and they found the rows of the pots, right? The ceramic rings, right? You must understand this. Everything will tell you about the city life, how the cities would be, right? How the people's fooding habit would be, how the people used to live in those cities, right? So these were basically well known as a ring wells. Now, this seems to have been used as a toilets in some cases, because if you find the ceramic rings, right, or the row of the pots, if the row of the pots is there, where the row of the pots will be used according to archaeologists, right, they have been used as a toilets, right? Archaeologists feel that they are basically, they may be used as a toilets, and as a drains or as a garbage dumps, because anything can be used if they have been pot which have been arranged in such a manner that they have been used to store some excreta, right? They may be, it may be toilet, or it may be some drains, or it may be some garbage dumps or anything, right? These ring wells which were there, they were often found in the individual houses also, so which will give you the lot of clue, right? So you must understand, and we have hardly any remains of palaces or homes of ordinary people. There was no such thing. There were no such thing. That means archaeologists did not find any remains of palaces and the markets, right? Or the homes of the poor people or the ordinary people, right? But perhaps some is yet to be discovered, because nobody knows what would come tomorrow, because many things we know today, that is based on our science, that is based on the present excavations, but what will come tomorrow nobody knows, right? And most of these things are made up of wood, mud, brick, thatch, which may not be survived for so long, right? Now, another way of finding out these early cities is basically on the accounts of the different sailors were there, travelers were there, oh, right? These sailors and the travelers used to visit these distinct lands, and they used to express, or they used to make a detailed account of their journey, right? Through the detailed account we come to know that, oh, that was or that thing is happened on that place, right? So for example, there was different sailors who basically move one place to another place, and they describe the different ports all together, and the people, another people basically followed their footsteps, okay, after reading all such things. Next is coins. Okay, now coins is just like a similar our coins. Okay, so these archaeologists who basically are professional, who basically work in that field, they found that several thousands of the coins they found in that period around 2500 years ago. Now, the earliest coins which were used, right, for about 500 years ago, which was basically punch mark coin. Punch mark coin, and such punch mark coins are very very common, right? Now, they have been given this name because the designs were punched on the metal, silver, or the copper. Punch mark coin, you understand now, so that the design will basically inscribe, on the hard metal surface, which is also known as punch mark coin. Okay, then let's understand the city functions also, how the city functions. Okay, so let's understand. So you must understand uh, that city functions, you came to know through the inscription first of all. Okay, the gift which was made by the men to the monasteries, to the shrines, right? And you must understand, these were also made by the kings and the queens, officers, merchants, craftspersons who lived in the cities. Okay, and the inscriptions from basically, for example, in Mathura mentions about the goldsmith, blacksmith, weavers, right? Basket makers, garland makers, right? Perfumers who used to function in the city, right? So we came to know all such people only through the different recordings, the different inscriptions which were basically found in the later period of the time. Okay. Next is craft and the craft persons. Okay. Now, this craft and the craft persons, you must understand, include some of the potters or fine pottery, right? Which are also called as the northern black polished ware, northern black polished ware, which were which was known as the fine pottery, which was known as the fine pottery. Now it gets its name from the fact that it is generally found in the northern part of subcontinent, the northern part of subcontinent. Why it is, it is found in the northern part of the continent? Because the most of the civilizations or well-known civilization was basically was basically evolved, and that at that point of the time, or at that point. Okay. Now why we call northern black polished ware? Because they usually black in the color. Okay. And having some sort of a fine sheen or fine shine on the surface. So that is why they call northern black polished ware. Why northern part? Because they have been found in the northern part of subcontinent. Why black? Because they have been colored in the black. Why polished ware? Because they have the fine shine. So that is why the name is called northern black polished ware. Everything clear? Okay. Next, there were famous centers. There were famous centers, right? For example, Varanasi in the north, or we call them Banaras. Okay. Madurai in south. Okay. Both, the both men and women used to work in the Varanasi as well as in the Madurai during that period of, during that point of the time, which was involved in such a fine pottery, which are also called northern black polished ware. Now, many of the craft persons which were there, or the merchants, right, they form some association. Okay, that same question was asked by the UPSC, I think in 2017 or 18. Okay, same detailed question was asked, right? The craft persons or the merchants, their association is called, or their guild is called Shreni. Shrenis. Shrenis. So Shrenis are basically an association or a guild of the craft persons or the merchants. Always remember, because UPSC has asked this already, this question. Okay. Now these Shrenis, or the associations or the guild, right? These Shrenis of the craft persons provided the training, because these were people who were basically associated with a certain professionals. So these were basically provided some training, procured raw materials, distributed the finished products. So they were involved just like a normal trading, and these trainees, which were basically an organization, were used to organize the trade also. So just like a normal, you have the trade organizations in a modern state also. In the past time also, they had this guild, which are also called the organization of these merchants, right? Which were basically also called Shrenis. They used to organize the trade during that period. All right. Then these Shrenis also serve as a bank, right? So they will serve as a bank, because on that time there was no such formal the banking system. So who would serve as a bank? These Shrenis, who were basically the guild or the association, they serve as a bank, right, for the rich men and the women. And they used to deposit the money in this the guild, right? And this was basically invested, and this money, just like a normal banking system, right? And after investing, whatever the money or whatever the part of interest that was returned, right, this money was used to support religious institutions, right, such as monasteries, right, and other temples which was there on that time. So you can think of how the people used to function during that period of the time, and how the people used to save their money, right, around 2500 years ago, and how the craft person used to function on that time. All right. So this is all about, we came to know only through the inscriptions, right? Let's understand about the traders, kings, and the pilgrims, right? So let's understand. So according to different studies, like historians, archaeologists, right, the people came to know, or the archaeologists or the historians came to know, that the southern India was very famous for the gold, right? Because gold mines are there. Okay. Now this gold were extracted on that period of the time. The southern India was also famous for the spices. For example, all along the western ghats, and even if you go towards, say Annamalai hills, Cardamom hills, right? All such hills are very famous for the spice cultivation, and especially the pepper, right, and precious stones. So southern India was very famous for gold, spices, pepper, stones, which are very known for them, right? And pepper was very valued during that period of the time in the Roman Empire, right? So much so that in the Roman Empire, this pepper, which is basically exported from India, it is known as the black gold in the Roman Empire. You're getting my point? So it is known as black gold in the Roman Empire. It was so famous. It was so famous in the Roman Empire. Now, these traders which used to trade, right? Many of these goods from, say, Roman Empire to the India, these traders used to have the ships, right? These ships used to cross the sea, right? And they were caravans. They were caravans where the caravans is basically an a group of the ships where they used to move together, right? Now, now you must understand this Roman gold coins. These have found in the southern India. How come these Roman gold coins have been came to southern India? So one explanation could be there was flourishing trade between the Roman Empire and the southern India. Let's say the spices or the pepper would have been exported to the Roman Empire, and in return the Roman Empire would have paid that pepper, right, in terms of, say, Roman gold coins, and they would have come through the trade. So that indirect source have have concluded the essence that there was a flourishing trade between India and the Roman Empire even long back also, right? These traders which used to come through, they explored several sea routes, right? And they followed the coast also. Now, for example, they cross the Arabian Sea, the Bay of Bengal, and moreover, these traders also took the help of monsoonal wind. For example, the Arabian traders which were there, they used to take the help of monsoon. So this monsoon word came from the word mosim. Mosim is an Arabian word which means the seasonal reversal of the winds. So हम जो मौसम use करते हैं, that was Arabian word, that is a seasonal reversal of the wind. So these winds basically seasonally reverse. For example, in the summer season, in the rainfall season, we have southwestern trade winds, and in the cold season, these winds reverse to northeastern trade winds. So from southwestern trade winds to northeastern trade winds. So you can think of this seasonal reversibility, and nowhere on the earth you found such seasonal reversal of the winds except the Indian subcontinent. So Indian subcontinent is very unique in the sense is that these monsoonal winds also help the traders to come into the Indian subcontinent and to move out along these trade winds during that period of the time. All right, then let's understand the kingdoms along the coast. Different type of kingdoms were there along the coast. So you understand the southern half of the subcontinents is marked by the long coastline. Okay, so southern half. So you must understand there were long coastlines, and there were hills also, there were plateaus also, and there were river valleys also. For example, you can say that all along the coastline, for example, if you say the eastern coast, you will have the Narmada, Godavari, Krishna, Kaveri, right? On the western coast you have the different rivers, right? So among those rivers, on that time the Kaveri was very fertile. Even today the Kaveri delta is very fertile, right? Isn't it? So on that time there was Kaveri Patnam, and this delta was very fertile. The chiefs and the kings who basically control the river valleys and the coast become the rich and the powerful. Why they become rich and powerful? Because there were two reasons for that. One, a flourishing trade. A trade could be flourished, right? Because on that time there was only one mechanism through which you can move out from the country is through the ships. So you have to control that vantage points, right, or the choke points where you can control your influence, or you can increase your influence. That's the first reason. The second reason is these were fertile valleys, and these were used for the cultivation of different crops also. So right, so those people who control these river valleys and the coast were very rich and the powerful kings. Now, the Sangam literature is basically one of the greatest literature of southern India, which were basically mentioned about the Cholas, Cheras, and the Pandyas. Right? These were different dynasties which used to have, right, or which used to, uh, you know, um, used to establish their kingdom in the southern India. Now, each of these three chiefs, that means Chola, Chera, and the Pandya, that we'll probably study in the tomorrow's class. These three chiefs had two centers of the power, right? Two centers of the power. One is on inland and one is on the coast, right? Out of these six cities, two were very, very important, right? One is called basically Kaveri Patnam. I told you it is a port of Cholas. It is on the on the banks of river Kaveri, right? On the delta or nearby delta of river Kaveri. So it was Kaveri Patnam, or is also called Puhar. It was also known as Puhar on that time. Kaveri Patnam was still there, right? And it was also known as the port of Cholas. And the second is Madurai. Madurai, the capital. Madurai was also capital of Pandyas, capital of Pandyas. All right. So from next slide, we'll see tomorrow. So I'm going to bind today's class at this slide, and probably will cover our next topic or continuing of this topic in the next class. All right. So we'll meet again in the next class, and we'll cover the remaining portion of your today's class. All right. So thank you very much for attending this session. Thank you.